think we can start. As you can see, the title of our presentation today is 5 Key Canadian Permanent Residence Pathways. As you may already know, there are many pathways through which candidates can obtain permanent residency in Canada. I think there's some sort of a survey that says there's over 80 pathways, but today we're going to talk about 5 that we have identified as the key pathways to Canadian permanent residency. The way we're going to do this is we will talk about the Federal Express Entry system and then address some of the provincial nominee programs with a focus only on the Atlantic provinces, since most of the audience here today are based in Atlantic Canada. We'll then talk about the very popular Atlantic Immigration Program and then move on to address some of the programs available for French-speaking candidates. And finally, we'll address the programs available for international graduates in Canada. And then we'll open the floor for questions. We have received some of your questions in advance, so some will be answered directly through our presentation, and some we have left towards the end of the presentation. But please, at any point in time, feel free to send questions in the chat, and we will make sure to answer those towards the end. And if we don't get to a question, we would be more than happy to connect with you afterward. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to my colleague, Amanda.
Good morning, everybody. So as Hanaa said, I practice in the St. John's, Newfoundland office, and I'm going to start today with the Federal Express Entry program. So Hanaa, if you could just advance a slide. But I think there's actually one more. Okay, so I'll start with a little overview of the definitions first. So just because there's a lot of acronyms used throughout the presentation, we just want to make sure everyone knows what we're talking about when we say them. So we've identified a couple that are seen throughout the presentation or that you may hear us say. They are the ECA, which is an educational credential assessment. That is a certificate that is used to verify foreign education and degrees to determine what their equivalency would be in Canada. Another you'll hear us talk about is the CLB, which is the Canadian Language Benchmark. That's the scale for determining candidates' proficiency in English or French. Candidates have to take that test for certain programs, regardless of whether their first language is English or French. It is required, particularly for the Federal Express Entry program that I'm going to discuss next. The NOC code, the NOC, is the National Occupational Classification. That is a code that is set by Service Canada, associated to various occupations. It tells us what tier an occupation is in. So you'll hear us talk about a tier in a NOC is either like 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. And depending on what the NOC code is in a particular occupation, tells us what tier it is, and that will determine what programs that a particular job will qualify for. And then you'll hear us talk about LMIAs, which are labor market assessments. And that's a document obtained from Service Canada to demonstrate that there is a need to hire a temporary foreign worker and that there's no qualified Canadian or permanent resident available to do the job. So if there are any other acronyms that we use that we haven't identified, you can certainly always type in the chat box and someone will let us know if you don't know what we're saying, but we'll try our best to say what they are as we're going through. So the Federal Express Entry program generally, it's federal, so it applies across the country, and there are no provincial variations. So it's everyone is in the same pool. It is a score-based system that ranks candidates in the pool, and based on their score, they can receive an invitation to apply. Previously, it was the go-to immigration pathway for permanent residency in Canada. Scores required to get an invitation to apply were much lower, and processing times were much quicker. It's not necessarily the best option for a lot of applicants right now. Competition has increased. The scores are much higher, than we've seen in the past. And so people, even with, very competitive scores, or what we used to think were competitive scores, are sitting in the pool for a long time before they even get an invitation to apply. And then once they get an invitation to apply, processing times have increased from 6 months to, 9, 12 months. So all combined total, your time in the pool and processing doesn't make it as quick of an option as we used to see. What I like about it though is that there is an online calculator that allows you to estimate your score. It's free to submit a profile, and as soon as you submit it, you can see where you rank based on your score. The profile stays active for 1 year. You have to update it as your situation changes, and your score may go up or down based on your change. And if you haven't gotten an invitation to apply within the 1 year, your profile will expire, but you can just simply resubmit a new one. To complete the profile, you do need to have a language test and an education credential assessment in addition to the other documents you typically need for immigration. There are 3 general streams. We're going to focus on 2 of them today, those being the Canadian Experience class and the Federal Skilled Worker. There is also a category that is specific to the skilled trades, which we won't go into detail on today. And the provincial nominee category is in conjunction with the provincial nominee programs, where the province may offer a hybrid option where you have to have a profile in the express entry pool in order to apply for a nomination under the provincial nominee program. We'll touch on that more when we talk about the provincial nominee programs. So for now, we'll go to the next slide and we'll look at the process. So next slide. Okay. So it's a pretty straightforward process. So you create the express entry profile. If you qualify, you will enter the pool. You will get your CRS score. So that's the comprehensive ranking score we talked about. You'll stay in the pool until you are invited to apply. Invitations to apply have historically happened about every 2 weeks. They are sometimes happening a little bit more randomly now, and they are focusing on category-based selection invitations to apply. So that could be based on a specific occupation, your French language proficiency, in-demand occupations, so healthcare, science, technology, like STEM occupations, some in transport, etc. So the invitations to apply can be general draws, or they can be these category-based selections. So if you're in the pool and you'll be eligible for a general draw. However, if you also qualify for one of the category draws, your chances of receiving an invitation to apply are obviously much higher. Once you receive an invitation to apply, you have to prepare your federal PR application. You have 60 days to submit your application. And then once your application goes in and is submitted and complete, your application will be acknowledged and it will go into processing. Again, we're seeing longer processing times now, but because of that, once you get your acknowledgement of receipt and that your application has made it through the completeness check, you can be eligible for a bridging open work permit to allow you to start working while you're waiting for your application to be in process. So that's the general process to enter the pool and what happens once you get an invitation to apply. Next, I'll talk about how you qualify for 2 of the categories that we're going to talk about or focus on, I should say, for this part of the presentation. And so the first is the Canadian Experience class. And as it says, you need to have Canadian experience in this class. So you have to have a minimum 1 year work experience or equivalent in Canada within the last 3 years. It has to be in a tier 0, 1, 2, or 3. So this is where the NOT code I talked about at the beginning will come into play. And when you determine that you have the work experience, it can be gained through part-time or full-time work. But it has to be the equivalent of 1 year full-time work experience. A job offer is not required. So that's one of the benefits and why some people like the express entry program, is because a job is not required to apply or to be selected. However, as we have seen the program become more competitive, it has certainly helped. And the people that we do see selected oftentimes have a job offer because they get extra points for having the arranged employment. So while it's not necessary, we certainly do see that it's beneficial to have a job offer. Um, What's also good about this category and express entry in general is that there are no funds required for the Canadian Experience class. So there's not a heavy requirement to show that you have, a lot of money in the bank to come and establish. As long as you have the Canadian experience, you can be eligible. There's no education requirement for your work experience. Again, however, having education, and you have to have your education credential assessment to apply, you will get higher points for higher education. So you have to be able to demonstrate the work experience as well. So what I caution people when they're submitting their profile is to really have a good look at what your education or what your experience is, your work experience, because you want to make sure that you have selected the right NOC, that it is qualifying Canadian work experience, and that you are able to demonstrate it, because there's certainly no point in submitting an application and getting a higher score based on experience that you then can't prove when you're submitting your application, because then it will be rejected as you wouldn't have qualified for the work experience. So moving on to the next one is the federal skilled worker. So like the Canadian Experience class, you do not have to have a job offer. There is a minimum of a high school requirement. Again, still get points for having the higher education. There's no proof of funds if you're already working in Canada on a valid work permit. If you're applying from outside of Canada and you haven't worked in Canada yet, then there would be a requirement to show your ability to financially relocate and establish yourself in Canada. However, for your work experience to qualify, it does not have to be only from Canada. They will allow foreign work experience as long as the work experience is continuous. So the work experience in the Canadian Experience class was cumulative 1 year experience. This work experience has to be 1 year, a minimum of 1 year, Canadian or foreign continuous work experience, again, in a high skilled tier category of 0, 1, 2, or 3. And this has to be within the last 10 years. So the other thing that's different with the federal skilled worker, apart from the Canadian Experience class, is that in order to be eligible for the federal skilled worker, there is an additional point system in order to qualify. So not to be confused with the CRS score, which is the comprehensive ranking score, there is a federal skilled worker score that you have to meet in order to be entered into or be eligible for the federal skilled worker program. There you have to have a minimum of 67 out of 100 points. The factors that are considered in awarding points are essentially the same. However, they have different point allocations. Again, this is available online. It's not necessarily a calculator, but you can certainly see how many points that you would get for your different things. If you are over the 67, you will be entered and eligible for the federal skilled worker. If you're not, similarly as if your CRS score is too low, there are things that you can do to increase your score, to increase your competitiveness, and that may be by retaking your language test to try to get higher scores, taking another academic program, and yeah, or if you have the second language, you can take both the English and the French test, and you can get extra points for having the second language. So there are ways that you can increase your score to increase your potential for getting an invitation to apply under the Federal Express Entry Program. So that concludes the very high-level overview of the Federal Express Entry Program. And Hanaa is going to start in on the provincial nominee programs.
Thank you, Amanda. So, as Amanda said, the Federal Express entry system is now a little bit over competitive, and is pretty much very difficult to get an invitation unless you really have achieved the highest points in all of the different categories. So you'd have to be really young, have a PhD, have Canadian education, scored the highest points on the language abilities, and also have a job offer, gone to school in Canada, have relatives who are Canadians, your spouse have done a language test and attained a high score as well. So it's pretty competitive, but it's still possible. So all people are now getting more focus on the provincial nominees program. So there's an increased demand on the provincial nominee programs. Each province and territory in Canada has a provincial nominee program with many streams, generally divided into streams that are targeting workforce and labor shortages, and those that are targeting businesses and entrepreneurs that are willing to start up a business or purchase a business, or international graduates who have come and gone to school in Canada and are intending to start on their own business. So the focus of our discussion today is going to be more on the workforce programs and not on the entrepreneurs, just because they're a little bit more complex and they would require, a webinar of their own. With the provincial nominee programs, generally we'll say that they vary by province. I'm going to talk about PEI and Nova Scotia. For example, PEI has 6 streams, Nova Scotia has 10 streams. The almost all of them have varying criteria for each stream. So the streams generally one way or another mimic the Federal Express Entry program. So some will be Express Entry based, where the criteria is that an individual be in the Express Entry pool, and that's why we really discuss the Express Entry system generally, because if a candidate is in the Express Entry pool, has a very low comprehensive ranking score, and is unable to get an invitation, if they're nominated by a province through an Express Entry stream of the province, then they can get an additional 600 points to their comprehensive ranking score and generally secure an invitation. And that's what we've seen the federal government recently focus their invitation on individuals that are in the PNP program, or those that have the Canadian Experience class, or those that are falling in the targeted draws. So the other programs are generally mimicking the federal skilled workers and are point based. So in some provinces, you have streams that are by invitation only, meaning that you essentially create an expression of interest and you get a score based on various factors. Again, it's always the same: education, age, language, work experience, adaptability factors, meaning whether you've gone to school in the province, whether your spouse went to school in the province, whether they've taken a language test, whether it's English or French. And then they basically issue an invitation based on the minimum score that they determine for that particular draw. Most of the provinces now, and PEI has been in the news lately because they are focusing their draws on priority sectors. And so when we're looking at PEI in particular, in February of this year, they have indicated that they would be reducing their quota by 25% from their invitation of 2023. So in 2023, they issued 20 nominations. And in 2024, they're only forecasting they'll issue 1590 nominations. And of those 1590, they're really focusing on priority sectors, which are healthcare, construction, manufacturing, and processing, and professional services and sciences. And they've really closed the invitations for anybody in the sales and services industry, which really caused a lot of chaos in the province. However, there is an indication that next year they're not going to be following this approach, and they will go back to the 2023 quotas. So, as I said, each program will have different criteria. All programs in Atlantic Canada will have an age range eligibility criteria, varies between 18 to 59. Prince Edward Island and I believe New Brunswick tend to be on the higher end, where they allow an applicant that's 59 years old to apply, whereas in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, it's at 55. Most of the program are targeting skilled workers. All provinces will have some sort of a program similar to the federal skilled worker, where they're looking for an individual that has the skills that the province requires to address their labor shortages. and most of them will have a requirement for a job offer. And this is where I want to sort of spend some time about talking about the job offer requirement. In PEI, there is an express entry stream that doesn't require a job offer. So anybody in the federal express entry pool can indicate an interest in moving to PEI and can be selected. However, because PEI is an invitation-only stream or province, and it does appoint a score based on an individual's personal circumstances, generally candidates that are overseas are not going to be as competitive as the candidates that are already in the province or have a job offer in the province, because their score is going to be higher. So even though they market it as a stream that doesn't require a job offer, they're really only targeting individuals with job offers. And they're also only targeting individuals that have gone to a post-secondary education in PEI, as opposed to those that are coming from outside or other provinces in Canada where they've gone and gotten their education and then gotten a postgraduate work permit and came to work in PEI. And if that is the case, then they require the candidate to show that they have at least 9 months of work experience with the PEI employer supporting their application, and at least 4 months of remaining on their work permit at the time of submission of their expression of interest. So they're a little bit limited in their options, but generally PEI is one of the more flexible provinces with their program. They have a number of skilled worker streams targeting individuals that are in the province and individuals that are outside of the province. And interestingly, they divide their skilled worker streams into different categories. So skilled worker stream for individuals in PEI that have a job offer in a high skilled category, i.e. tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, and those that are for individuals with a job offer in a tier category 4 or 5. Any stream that is targeting individuals with a tier category 4 or 5 job offer generally requires the individual to have worked with the employer for 6 months. PEI has an extra stream, which is called the intermediate experience stream, targeting only tier 4 category, where they don't require the 6 months to be with the PEI employer offering the job, but rather for it can be gained in anywhere in Canada with any employer, so long as it was on an LMIA work permit. So they have some options for individuals who haven't been able to gain the work experience in PEI but want to relocate to PEI. Generally, the job offer, when we talk about a job offer, it has to be genuine. And what we mean by genuine is that when an employer is offering a foreign national a job offer, they are attesting to the genuineness of the labor demand for the candidate. So they are required to undergo a recruitment campaign where they're trying to find candidates in Canada that are Canadians or permanent residents that can do the job. PEI doesn't have a strict sort of time frame or number of advertisements that are required, whereas Nova Scotia is more strict and requires the ads to be up for 4 weeks, for example, in 3 different locations. One is national in scope, and they also require certain information to be in the ad. So if the ad doesn't meet the advertisement criteria, that will not be considered eligible recruitment. The exception, however, is that if you are offering the job to a candidate that is already working for you, either on an LMIA work permit or on a open work permit, whether it's a postgraduate work permit or an open spousal work permit. So the benefit of the provincial nominees program and later on the AIP is that the employers do not require an LMIA, which can be a lengthy, complicated, and costly process. The job offer, to be valid for most of the provincial nominee streams, has to be full-time, meaning at least 30 hours per week, but you can offer more than 30 hours, but the minimum has to be 30 hours, and it has to be valid. Generally, the preference is it's permanent job offer. However, in PEI, and Amanda will touch on New Brunswick, the job offer can be of at least 2 years. They are flexible and don't necessarily require a permanent job offer. PEI is interestingly one of the provinces that requires at least 2 years of full-time work experience. However, they don't necessarily require the work experience, at least their guides, and the province is not strict on the work experience being related to the job being offered, as long as the candidate has shown that they have 2 years of work experience, with the exception of one of their streams, which is the occupations in demand, that is targeting particular not codes and jobs that are in extreme shortages in the province, where they will require that the job be related to the job offer, and it's only 1 year of related work experience. Otherwise, you can have at least 2 years of work experience obtained in the last 5 years, and that would be valid. PEI generally requires candidates to have completed a minimum of high school, but some of their streams require a minimum of post-secondary degree that is at least 2 years in length. Their language requirement is one of the easiest across, I would say, across the nation and the country, in that they require CLB4, and they don't necessarily require a language test. So applicants with job offers in high school jobs in tiers 0, 1, or 2, or 3 can provide a letter from the employer attesting to that they are satisfied with their language ability, or educational documents to demonstrate that they have studied in English or French, so they don't actually need to do a language test. And all provinces will require the candidate to demonstrate their intention to settle and to show sufficient financial resources to settle in the province. But if you are already in the province working, then you don't really need to show financial resources. One of the interesting streams in PEI is targeting international graduates. So they have a particular program for international graduates that have graduated from a publicly funded PEI institution. And essentially, it can be a job offer for any of the tiers, so high skilled or low skilled. Again, they require to demonstrate language proficiency and to have a valid postgraduate work permit, and to demonstrate their education, but they might have to attend an interview with the PEI Office of Immigration. The nice thing about the international graduate stream is the graduates or the candidates do not have to have any related work experience. So this is an immediate pathway. As soon as an individual obtains a postgraduate work permit and secures a job, they can apply for this stream. So it's the fastest pathway in PEI for international graduates, but you have to have attended school in PEI. As I indicated, they have an occupations and demand stream. All provinces have an occupation and demand stream of some sort, targeting particular NOCs, and they require related work experience. PEI requires 1 year of full-time experience as opposed to 2 years. But the interesting catch here is that it doesn't have to be attained within the last 5 years or 3 years if they're looking at the express entry stream. It has to be attained anytime in their lifetime. So it's indefinite time period, which is very good. That's it essentially for PEI. And now moving on quickly to discuss Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia, as I said, has 10 streams. 2 of those streams are targeting entrepreneurs, one particularly addressing international graduates that have attended school in Nova Scotia, and one is generally for any entrepreneurs. And the good thing just to learn about entrepreneur programs is generally they don't have an age limit, unlike all the other streams. So again, we'll not focus on the entrepreneurs, but generally 2 of those are for entrepreneurs. 2 of the streams are focused on physicians for those that have a job offer either from the Nova Scotia Health Authority or the IWK, so outside of the scope of this talk today. And then they have, like any of the other provinces, an express entry stream that mimics exactly the Canadian experience class. So it requires an individual to meet one of the eligibility criteria of the 3 programs administered by the Federal Express Entry. And so in this case, the Nova Scotia experience class means that you've gained your Canadian experience in Nova Scotia. And again, the language requirement meets the language requirements of the express entry system. No requirement for a job offer, and it's not a point-based system. So as long as you've gone to and worked for an employer in Nova Scotia and for 1 year, that is doesn't have to be continuous. It can be over a number of different months at different years. So it doesn't, unlike the federal skilled worker, which requires continuous work experience, the Nova Scotia experience class just requires that the experience has been gained in over at least 12 months. So you can't gain the 1 year of experience over 9 months. It has to be at least 12 months and longer. The interesting thing about the Nova Scotia experience class is that even though you've gained the experience in Nova Scotia, the wage paid has to be within the wage range of the of the wages paid in the province for that particular NOC code under which you gained the the job experience. Nova Scotia is one of the provinces that is taking quite a long time to process nominations. So it's not, we used to be able to get nominations within 2 to 4 months. We're now looking at 6 months and up. We actually have an application that's been in processing for more than 9 months. And they again are focusing on priority sectors, healthcare, construction, manufacturing. And so we're not seeing any movement. They are showing some flexibility if some individuals have upcoming expiring work permits, but the AIP, for instance, in Nova Scotia is not showing any leniency or flexibility for individuals with expiring work permits. I'd say that in Atlantic Canada, we're very fortunate in that we have a relationship with the offices of immigration. We can easily get in touch with the program directors, with the officers, and have a discussion with them. And they tend to be flexible, and if we can put a good case or advocate for and develop a strong case for why they should accept an application, even though one of the eligibility criteria is not met, they generally will try to be flexible because the objective is to retain individuals in the provinces. Generally, Atlantic Canada has been struggling with retaining international graduates and foreign workers. So the intention is that they try to facilitate as much as they can. So the other most popular stream in Nova Scotia is the skilled workers. So PEI, as I said, has 3 skilled worker streams, or 3 streams targeting skilled workers. Nova Scotia has 1. So anyone with a job offer, any tier category, can apply so long as they meet the language requirement, which varies depending on the NOC code, as long as they have at least a minimum of a high school diploma, and they have a job offer from a genuine employer that has been operating in the province for 2 years. The only problem with the skilled worker stream in Nova Scotia is that the total income of the family, depending on the family size, has to meet LICO, the low income threshold, cutoff threshold issued by the federal government yearly. So even if a candidate meets all of the eligibility criteria, if their income, even if they're being paid the regular wage for that particular NOC in the province, if their income based on their family size is below LICO, they will not be accepted and they will be refused. So that's one thing that a lot of people don't know about the Nova Scotia skilled worker stream. But in Nova Scotia, you have to provide an ECA if you're an international graduate, if you've received your education outside of Canada, regardless of the stream, with the exception of the skilled worker stream. So sometimes there was a question about whether you choose AIP or skilled worker. We have some candidates that are unable to get an ECA, which is required for the AIP. So the skilled worker, the nominee program, would be an alternative for them. Otherwise, if a candidate can provide an ECA but their income doesn't meet LICO, then the AIP would be the option to go. So we kind of have to do an analysis of eligibility based on the individual circumstances under each stream to decide, or each option to decide which one to go with. So there isn't really sort of a one answer fits all. And then Nova Scotia, like other provinces, has an occupations in demand stream, again, targeting certain NOC codes. And all of these streams in Nova Scotia requires only 1 year of work experience. It has to be related to the job, but it doesn't have to be in the same NOC. So in Nova Scotia, for instance, under the skilled worker stream, if you have experience in a tier 2 category, you can accept a job offer in a tier 5 category. And so there is flexibility there. And the experience has to be attained within the last 5 years. Nova Scotia, like PEI, has an international graduates in demand stream, but it's not for all international graduates who have a job offer from a Nova Scotia employer. It's only for particular NOC codes that they've identified that there is a shortage in, and the individual must have completed a program of study at Nova Scotia designated learning institution that met certain criteria within the 3 years of their application. So it's not available for all international graduates. It's only for some particular international graduates that have met the labor shortages. And we finally have one interesting stream in Nova Scotia. It's the labor market priorities. It's an express entry stream. Applicants cannot apply directly to the stream, but the benefit of the stream is that if you are in the express entry pool, you're not in Nova Scotia, you're outside of Nova Scotia, you're outside of Canada, you don't have a sufficiently high comprehensive ranking score, but you have the skills that and the qualifications that Nova Scotia says we have a shortage in. And the labor shortages varies and changes regularly. So an officer can go into the express entry pool and says, oh, this individual has indicated an interest in immigrating to Nova Scotia. We're going to give them an invitation. So only if you receive a letter of interest from Nova Scotia, then you can submit an application for nomination within 30 days. So this is a unique program, but it's only by invitation by the province if you meet the skills. So there is no need to have a particular score, but they will change the invitation criteria regularly based on their demands. Nova Scotia recently introduced the critical construction worker pilot. So in the past, construction workers can apply through the skilled worker stream. However, what the province is doing is allocating a certain portion of their quota program towards construction workers where they know that we have a very well-known shortage. And again, they're only targeting individual with a job offer in a particular set of knocks. And again, a person will have to have 1 year of related work experience. However, what we were seeing people in the construction industry or candidates in the construction industry were facing issues with is they were not able to have a high school diploma or were not able to obtain one. So now the pilot gives you a flexibility of either providing a high school diploma or show and demonstrate that you've completed some sort of a construction specific industry training program in your country. So that's the benefit of this program, but the downside still is that individuals will still have to show that they meet the Canadian language benchmark of level 5 for a tier category 0, 1, 2, or 3, or 4. So it's still a little bit difficult for some candidates from certain countries to meet the language requirements for the construction pilot program. To end on Nova Scotia, I just want to note that Nova Scotia requires employers to basically have a foreign national employer certificate, registration certificate that has to be obtained from the labor standards in accordance with the labor standards code. And so the employer registration certificate, we meet a lot of clients that don't even know that they are required to have it. So it's a requirement that you must have it unless you're inviting or hiring applicants that have tier categories in not codes 0 or 1. There are some exemptions. So if you're hiring international students or specialized service providers or independent contractors, you don't need to obtain a certificate, but otherwise you have to have the employer registration certificate, and it's valid for 1 year. So it has to be renewed annually, and it's pretty straightforward and pretty quick to obtain. But the point of it is that you're reading on your obligations when you're signing the application. You're reading on your obligations to work for nationals. Another key thing to know about Nova Scotia is that you need to, if you're using a recruiter to hire foreign nationals, you need to use a licensed recruiter, and a recruiter has to have a certain application, a certain license with the province, and not using a licensed recruiter can result in hefty fines. But if you identify and you confirm to the province that you've used a third-party recruiter that is not licensed, you're not going to be hit with a fine right away, but they will give you sort of a brochure and information about your obligations and where to find licensed recruiters. So this is something that a lot of our clients usually are unaware of. And finally, if you're based in Nova Scotia, note that Nova Scotia has a program integrity unit, and they've just released a new policy about their program integrity, and meaning basically that when you're giving a job offer and signing on the NSNP form, whether for the skilled worker stream or if you're doing an endorsement under the AIP, you are declaring and attesting to certain obligations, and the consequences of any misrepresentation can result not only in the refusal, but they can ban you from using the Nova Scotia immigration programs for a long period. And that's it for Nova Scotia. I'll pass it on now to Amanda to discuss New Brunswick and Newfoundland.
All right, thanks, Hanaa. So, good news. New Brunswick and Newfoundland are not as complicated as Nova Scotia. There's not as many streams. They're more generalized. I'm going to start with New Brunswick. And the reason I'm going to start with New Brunswick is because I'm not going to have a whole lot to say about it. And that's because, as Hanaa had mentioned, the provincial nominee programs have really picked up in pace, and there have been a lot of applications directed to at the provincial level. And just within the last month or so, New Brunswick has stopped accepting applications in their main immigration streams because they've already reached their allocation of nominations for the year. So I will say that, like the other provinces, they do have a worker stream and an entrepreneurial stream. Focusing on the worker stream, they have a skilled worker stream that's similar to the other provinces. They have an express entry stream, and then they have a New Brunswick Strategic Initiative Program, which I will talk on because that one is interesting and will tie in with the French language proficiency that I'll talk about a bit later. So to start with the skilled worker, it historically has been very similar in that you have to have a job offer from an eligible employer in the province. It has to be a genuine job offer, and you have to have a genuine intent to live and work in New Brunswick on a permanent basis. What the requirements of the job are, what the tier requirements or experience requirements, I'm not going to get into that because it is closed now. And given that they've reached their allocation so early, we don't know what changes will be made to the program before they reopen again for the next year. They may do something like PEI has done, where they've decided to reduce the overall number or to change it to a different priority-based system. So there's a kind of a wait and see what's going to happen. But for now, there are no applications being accepted under the skilled worker stream. Similarly, under the express entry stream, they've also reached their allocation, and so no other applications are being accepted there. But in general, what we have seen is that, like other provinces, to be eligible under the provincial express entry hybrid model, you have to be eligible and have an active profile in the express entry pool. And then in New Brunswick, in addition to that, you have to have the intention and desire to live and work in New Brunswick, and you have to show that you have a connection to New Brunswick. And that connection can be an employment connection, a student connection, or a priority-based connection. So to have an employment connection, you would have had to have been working for at least 6 months or have a full-time job offer already. Under the student, you would have had to graduate from a designated learning institution in the province and be eligible for a postgraduate work permit. And you would have had to have completed your studies within these 6 months prior to your application. So if you've graduated more than 6 months ago, you would no longer be eligible for the student connection, and you would have to look at one of the other employment or priority-based connections. And so the last connection you could have to New Brunswick was a priority-based connection. And that may be whether you have family members, you speak French, or other connections to New Brunswick. So again, that's what we've seen in the past. What that will look like in the future is to be determined. It is closed for now. Any applications that were submitted before it was closed will be processed. But going forward, it's not clear what the programs will look like. So the one that I did want to speak about, which I think it's safe to say that it will continue on and may still be accepting applications and is in line with the priorities of the federal government, is the Strategic Initiative Program. And that program is for French-speaking foreign nationals with the skills, education, and work experience who are ready to come and live and work in New Brunswick. You can show your desire to live and work in New Brunswick by having an exploratory visit to New Brunswick in advance of your application, if you have a job offer, or if you meet one of their priorities, such as being a recent grad of U to M or one of their French Canadian colleges. If you've been residing there for 12 months already, or if you have received an invitation to apply from an officer. So that is in line with the French-speaking initiatives and priorities, and really push on the bilingualism and French-speaking foreign nationals settling in Canada. In New Brunswick, up till now, all of their streams have been expression of interest, which is in contrast to my home province of Newfoundland, which I'll speak about next. I would say that the Newfoundland program is one of the more streamlined programs and has significant flexibility. It's also my understanding that we typically do not reach our allocations. And so if you are being denied, it's because you don't meet one of the qualifications of the program. And up till now, at least, we haven't seen where we've reached our cap allocations. So applications are being processed relatively quickly and remain open. They did recently close a priority skills stream. So currently we have a skilled worker stream, a hybrid stream with the express entry federal program, as well as an international graduate stream. And we have 2 entrepreneurial streams that are not very common, and we're not going to speak about today, but there is one for international entrepreneurs and there's one for international graduate entrepreneurs. Again, as Hanaa said, they are very specific and could almost have their own webinar. So focusing on the workers stream, in Newfoundland, whether you're applying under the skilled worker category or the international student category, there is no expression of interest, and you can apply directly to the program as long as you have a job offer in the province. In the skilled worker program, there is a requirement, unless the candidate is already working in the province on an open work permit, that the employer does advertise. In Newfoundland, it's called a job vacancy assessment, a JVA. It's similar to an LMIA and likely similar to the process Hanaa described in Prince Edward or in Nova Scotia about having to advertise for a certain period of time and advertise in certain places. And to be able to attest to the fact that there are no qualified Canadians or permanent residents to do the work. When we close the priority skills, what the Newfoundland government has done has created an in-demand occupation list. And so when you have a job offer that is in an in-demand occupation, you are exempt from the job advertising requirements. So that certainly fast tracks an application because you don't have to wait the time period for the advertising and the recruitment period. So if you have a job offer in an in-demand occupation, your application can be submitted sooner. You don't have to wait for the JVA, which can take a little bit of time, but not so much. And they have this new immigration accelerator that's, once all the technical stuff is worked out, should speed up the process and streamline all of the applications. What, pardon me, what is interesting and kind of is why I say that the categories are very broad, is that under the skilled worker program, all NOCs are eligible. So it doesn't have to only be in a high skilled NOC. Tier 4 and 5 NOCs are eligible. If your job offer is in a lower skilled NOC, you would have to have a language test to demonstrate your language proficiency, but there is no ECA required. So you don't have to have your foreign credentials assessed, as long as you have 1 year related work experience. It doesn't have to be the same in the same NOC, as long as it's related and that you can demonstrate that you have that previous job experience. The job does have to be from an eligible employer, which means they've been in operation in the province, they're in good standing with the province, and the job offer, while preferably would be for an indefinite duration, there is a lot of flexibility within the Office of Immigration, where so long as sorry, I just seen a pop-up question there. I'll get to that in a minute. But as long as the job offer is in a related occupation, you're fine. And the wage only needs to be within the range. It doesn't have to be the median prevailing wage. It can be within the entire wage. And there are no fund requirements. So we have seen applications be approved with, very limited settlement funds. The funds requirement is larger for candidates applying from outside of Canada because they have to move and relocate, but typically settlement funds is not a bar to a nomination, and the province really does what it can to try to make a candidate eligible if they want to come to work and settle in Newfoundland. With the international graduate category, similarly, no expression of interest, and you can apply as long as you have a job offer. There's no advertising requirements for an international graduate, so you can apply without the JVA. It does exclude Tier 5 positions. It's preferred that the job offer would be in a high skilled job, so Tier 0, 1, 2, 3. There are some exceptions for Tier 4 positions, as long as they are one of the in-demand positions. And your schooling in Newfoundland, as long as you graduated from one of the designated learning institutions in Newfoundland, your job offer doesn't have to be related to your schooling. The job offer just has to have a requirement of some post-secondary education, which is typically needed for a high-skilled job in any case. It's only if you are an international grad from outside the province that you have to have 1 year of experience before applying, and your job offer would have to be related to your schooling. So for someone who graduates from a designated learning institution in Newfoundland, you don't have to wait to get experience. You can apply as soon as you're finished your program, you get your postgraduate work permit, you start working, you can apply right away for a nomination under the province. And, in some cases, get your permanent residency before your postgraduate work permit even expires. So, like in the skilled worker category, you don't need a language test unless it's a Tier 4. You don't need a education credential assessment, obviously, because your education would have been in Canada. Wage has to be within the range, and settlement funds, again, not necessarily a bar to your nomination. So we've seen them with, as low as $1,000 in the bank. It's preferable that you be able to show more, but not a bar in this province. And then finally, I will speak about the skilled worker express entry in Newfoundland. So again, like the others, you have to have qualified for one of the express entry categories. And as long as you meet the express entry category and you have an active profile in the express entry pool, and you have a eligible job offer from a Newfoundland employer, you can make an application through the hybrid program, and by getting the nomination, you would get the 600 points, all but securing an invitation to apply under the express entry program. And otherwise, it's relatively the same as the skilled worker regular profile. The only difference, which is similar to the federal skilled worker, is that there is a federal or a skilled worker calculation that's apart from the CRS and the express entry, where you have to have the 67 points out of 100 to be eligible. But as long as you meet those requirements and you get that nomination, you will get the 600 points added to your express entry profile. So that's all I'm going to say about Newfoundland. And I just sent a note saying we only have 6 minutes left and we have a lot to continue talking about. And there's questions coming in. So I'll let Hanaa go on about the Atlantic Immigration Program, and I will take a look at this question.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm cognizant of the time. So just to wrap it up, because we did address a lot of the programs that are available for international graduates that are in Canada. And Amanda addressed some of the French-speaking options in New Brunswick and under the express entry system. But generally, the AIP was a program that is essentially employer based. It requires the employer offering the job to be designated. So that's the downside of the AIP. But like any other nominee program, it requires you to offer a full-time, non-seasonal, permanent, or a valid job offer for 1 year from the time the person becomes a permanent resident. Based on the length of the job offer depends on of the job, but it requires the employer and the employee to work together with a settlement organization to obtain a settlement plan. And once a settlement plan is in place, they can then apply to endorse the position of the applicant, and then the applicant can apply for PR and work permit. The good thing about the AIP is that you don't need an LMIA, but you still have to do the recruitment unless the person is currently working for you on an LMIA-based work permit or postgraduate work permit. The one major thing about the AIP is that the employer has to be in active operation in the province for at least 2 years, and it has to be under the same management. So a sale of the business doesn't result in de-designation, but the new parent company would have to get a new designation certificate. But a change in management would result in de-designation, and you'd have to apply for designation from all over again. The employers are required to undergo 2 major trainings, an intercultural competency training and an AIP training. And the problem is that if you're a major individual that represents you under the AIP program leaves the company, then the new person that takes the role will have to go through the training again. So just having completed the training in the past will not be sufficient unless you can prove that you have existing intercultural competency trainings in your organization on a regular basis and require an exemption. Nova Scotia has recently introduced a new process where if individuals are leaving, you have to designate a new employer contact. And let me tell you, that is it's supposed to be a straightforward process, but it is actually causing a lot of delays and it's requiring a lot of administrative work on the part of the employers. But otherwise, the requirements for the AIP program are pretty much consistent with any other nominee program. I believe we've addressed most of the questions that were asked of us prior to the webinar through our presentation. But one of the questions that was asked is whether you can, what are your obligations as an employer if you're supporting an individual with PR? And what I would say for employers, when you're giving them a job offer or when you're going through the endorsement, you are signing, there's a particular declaration that you are signing onto. You are declaring that the job offer is genuine, that every statement that you made in the application is true. We're seeing provinces scrutinizing the AIP in particular pretty heavily lately to ensure that there isn't abuse of the program. you're ensuring that you are not charging the employee to give them the job offer. So you, however, like any employer, you can terminate a foreign national with or without cause if their performance or for whatever reason you may have doesn't suit your business demands or labor needs. So you can terminate them. But if you do so, you have an obligation to report the termination of employment to the province if you've supported them by through a nominee program or the AIP, and that will affect their ability to continue with their PR application. The province will advise IRCC. IRCC will pause the PR application if they've already submitted their PR, but the individual also has an obligation to update the province and IRCC. Generally, the province will allow them to find alternative employment, and if they do, they can then reapply for nomination and continue with their PR application. But as an employer, you don't have an obligation to continue employing someone just because you've started with their nomination or endorsement. So there is a question. How flexible is Newfoundland government with respect to tech startups enrolled in the Genesis Enterprise Program? My understanding is the company is not eligible employer. We haven't been in operation for 2 years and don't have employees that are Canadians or permanent resident holders. Amanda?
Yeah, so while I have said that the Newfoundland government is generally flexible and does what it can to try to encourage the hiring and retainment of international workers. That is a requirement. It's not to say that you couldn't apply, but it will depend on, how long you've been in operation. Like, are you close or did you literally just start? What kind of profits do you have, or what your business plan is? So, kind of like the entrepreneurial streams, I would say that, it really does require an individualized assessment. And it's worth looking into, but generally, unfortunately, we haven't been there yet. We don't have an established tech stream in this province. So, without that right now, your employee, I think, up above it said that they're working with you right now on an open work permit, would be, if they want to apply for PR, they could look at whether they may be eligible under the express entry, because the job offer is not required, if they otherwise can meet the score. Otherwise, they can continue working with you on the open work permit until you may become an eligible employer, and then you can make them a job offer, to extend their work permit with an LMIA. If it's an in-demand position, then once you meet the requirements, you could get them a JVA or be exempt from the advertising requirements for an in-demand position, many of which are in the tech sector, and then get them another work permit to stay on until you can become more established and an eligible employer. So I know that's not, it's probably not the answer that you were hoping for. So, really, I would just say to not lose hope, and that, there is a focus on the in-demand occupations. So potentially, next we could see an introduction to a tech program, but currently it doesn't exist in this province.
There was another question from Newfoundland talking about a prospective, an employer who hasn't been in operation for 2 years, and how can they support a potential employee that has an open work permit? I'll leave it for you to mention.
That was the same person. They just reworded the question.
Okay, sorry.
No, all good.
Then another question, can you comment a little on the English language exams required for postgraduate work permit holders starting in November? You've been following the news. This was an announcement that was made by the federal government yesterday. As you can imagine, they're making a number of changes. We don't have much information yet, but it's going to be the same language. I'm assuming it's going to be the same language, the CELPIP, the IELTS, or the third language that was a test that was introduced more recently earlier this year. That the name escapes me right now, but we don't know. It talks about university graduates will need to have a CLB level 7, and the college graduates will have to have a CLB level 5. So essentially, you're doing the same thing as you would for PR, but you're now going to have to do it a little bit earlier. It will be interesting to know whether that test is going to be valid and remain valid. Generally, they're valid for 2 years, so we'll wait to see whether it will be remain valid when an applicant applies for PR. The other, I believe there was a question about individuals who are here on visitor status and how they can, be supported. And you may have also seen the recent news that the public policy that was in place that allows individuals with visitor records or visitor status in Canada to apply for a work permit from within Canada has ended. However, there is a special policy that allows individuals to flagpole, where basically people go across the border to the US if they had valid status in Canada and upon re-entry apply for a work permit. That process is still available, but again, the employer will have to go through their recruitment and show the need for the actual genuine labor need for the individual. But I will say that over the last couple of months, we have seen that border officers at land borders are becoming very, very strict, very unfacilitative. And some people are actually getting their phones taken away and uh, checked for any documentation that shows that they may have been working in the country illegally, and they're being issued reports for inadmissibility. So I'd really caution anybody to encourage anyone to go to the border and make an application without first speaking with before first seeking legal advice. Some borders are more flexible than others, but the land borders are really, the last couple of months have been quite tough to deal with and not flexible at all. So that's just something to note in terms of visitor status. But you can always, if you have a job offer, you can always leave the country and apply for PR through nomination, and then you can apply for a work permit through the support of the employer, who can ask for a work permit support letter, whether it's through the AIP or the nominee program. I think that's it for most of the
Just on
questions.
that, just on the flag polling, I'll say that it's something that we're continuing to watch. As Hanaa said, we are hearing that they're more strict at the border, and even prior to that, there was a lot in the news about the process of flag polling, and so a lot of borders have reduced their hours. Some borders won't accept flag polling outside of the limited hours, and postgraduate work permits can't be obtained through flag polling anymore. So, there are certain restrictions, and they have limited the ability of people to flagpole, and we continue to or can expect that that may continue into the future as more people, because of the change in the public policy allowing visitors to apply, as more people start to flagpole and kind of block up and slow down the movement of traffic across the border. We can anticipate that there may be some additional restrictions. So again, just to echo Hanaa's comment that you should always seek legal advice, not only in Canada, but potentially about, any conflict or any concerns about, entering the US, and what implications that may have to ensure that you have the ability to go into the US or risk being denied entry, and what that means going forward. So definitely something you want to consider in advance.
One other question that we had received prior to the webinar was, do you think that applying for PR through an employer or through spousal sponsorship is easier? The spousal sponsorship route is a family sponsorship program, and definitely if it's a genuine relationship and you have all the documentation, definitely go through the spousal sponsorship. The processing times are way faster, and you can also get an open work permit to work in Canada. And in terms of the processing times for in Canada spousal sponsorship, we're seeing them being issued within 2 to 3 months. So I definitely recommend spousal sponsorships for sure. There's one last question. Is it anticipated that Newfoundland will change its nominee program, or is it the expectation that the program is fairly stable and unlikely to change?
I would say that, there have been very few and far between changes up till now. And because we haven't reached our allocations, there may be some minor changes. The list of in-demand occupations may change, but I don't personally foresee that there would be much in the way of changes with respect to our skilled worker stream or our international graduate stream. Until or unless we get an influx of applications based on the limits in other provinces, or just because everybody wants to live and work in Newfoundland, which hasn't been the case up till now. Until we get an influx, or the program starts to see being its limits being pushed and having to kind of refocus its immigration. Right now, it's a very easy place to get a nomination and a work permit and permanent residency, provided you have the intent to live and work here. I don't foresee any major changes, but oftentimes, changes happen without notice. So, don't hold me to that. But for now, it's business as usual in Newfoundland.
All right. I don't see any further questions in the chat. So with that, we will end the webinar. Thank you all for joining us. We will be sending out, you will be receiving a recording of this webinar in a week's time. And so you'll have our contact information. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out either to Amanda or myself. Once again, thank you for joining us.
Take care.